Hello, everyone. In honor of the opening of the summer collection with bee and honeysuckle, I have written a new story that I wanted to share with you all. And you're welcome to share this story with others too, if you want to. And for those of you who attended our spring gathering with the Fox and the Dandelion collection, the spring collection, this story is a sequel to that one. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to that story, I'll put a link to that below in the description so that you can maybe watch that first and then catch up with this one. So this story is called Honey Haven. I just wrote it, so I might have to look at my notes a little bit as we go. But perhaps you've heard the story of the city fox who helped save a magical hive of honeybees. You have? Well, did you know that it didn't end there? After that plot of land in the city was transformed into a haven for wildlife by the local school, the dandelions and everything else were thriving, especially the bee's nest that was high up in the branches of the old oak tree. It continued to ooze out its magical and delicious honey. And it was because of this that this place began to be known as Honey Haven. For a city, you would have been shocked to see how wildly happy the plants and the animals were there. The trees and plants were lush and green, and the flowers were blooming everywhere. Soon, more and more animals all around the city heard about Honey Haven, and especially the delicious honey, which the bees were happy to share, because the other animals would respectfully take turns beneath the hive, waiting, their tongues out for it to drip, 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 for them to taste it. Sweet and delicious, the best thing they had ever tried. And it was a busy but happy hive of honeybees. Everyone had their role. There were worker bees that would fly from the nest to collect delicious nectar from all of the flowers, and they would bring pollen back to feed the rest of the colony. They were also always on the lookout for new sources of food. And then the queen was the head of the hive, and her responsibility was to make sure that everyone stayed healthy and happy. She also spent most of her days laying eggs, which would then hatch into larvae and then grow into bees someday too. However, one day, as the bees were going about business as usual, something knocked against the hive, and it began to shake. And then the bees heard a loud noise. Caw! Caw! And again, the hive shook. Some of their honeycomb walls began to crumble around them. So the worker bees flew out of the hive to see what was going on. There was a big black crow flapping and flying all around the hive. Then it would swoop down and peck at the hive over and over and over with its strong and large beak. The hive began to crumble, and honey poured out of it, which the crow started to gulp up mouthfuls of. The bees tried to stop the crow. They buzzed louder and louder and flew faster and faster all around it. Some tried to sting the crow to defend their hive. But each bee could only sting just once, as they would die soon after. The crow kept flapping its wings and shrieked with each sting, and meanwhile the hive started to sway back and forth and back and forth. Eventually, the crow flew away, but not before the beehive snapped off of the branch that it had clung to for so many years and fell to the ground. Splat! Honeycomb and honey splattered all over the ground. The hive and all of its honey was destroyed. So the remaining bees crawled from the wreck, including the queen bee, who had survived the whole ordeal. And in utter shock, all the bees looked to the queen for her guidance. What were they going to do? In all her time as queen bee, this had never happened before. She knew it would take a long time to rebuild a hive like the one that they had had before. And even if they did, would the crow come back? So the queen said to all the bees in the colony, "We must find a safer place to make a new home. Worker bees, will you go out and look for somewhere safe that we could nest?" So the worker bees flew up into the sky and started to search all over Honey Haven, searching for a place that they could make a new home. And in a dusty, quiet area, one bee flew over and noticed something on the ground. It looked like an opening. So it flew down to check what it was and saw that it was a hole that led down into various tunnels and underground rooms. It must have been a rabbit's burrow at some point, but it was empty now. No one lived there. So the bee flew back to the queen to announce what it had discovered. The queen agreed that this would be a good spot to go. So the bees all went there and started to settle into a new life underground, under the earth rather than above it. So because they started to live underground, everything changed for everyone in Honey Haven. Though the bees continued to make their honey, they weren't able to share it like they had before. When it would ooze out of the nest, it would just be absorbed by all the soil around it before any of the animals could come and get a little taste. So it was a sad time for everyone. The thing that had brought them all together once was now gone. But little did they know that in the soil surrounding the new bee's nest, there were some very special seeds, small seeds that were waiting for the perfect conditions. And as the soil under and around these seeds filled with honey, the seeds began to grow up and up and up above the soil, and climbed and climbed and climbed. So one morning, a young rabbit was hopping near the underground nest, searching for something to eat. All of a sudden, her nose twitched. That smell! What was that smell? It smelled a lot like honey. So the rabbit followed the sweet smell until she reached this tangled mess of vines above the bee's home. The vines were covered in green leaves and masses of beautiful pink, purple, white, and yellow flowers that she had never seen before. So she inhaled another long sniff, and they all smelled of sweet, delicious honey. So the rabbit nibbled one, and then nectar started to pour out all over her tongue. It tasted sweet too. She jumped around with excitement and began calling for the other bees and the other animals. Soon, a large crowd gathered around, and everyone was curious about these flowers that they'd never seen before. And everyone wanted a taste too. So many of them began eagerly reaching out to pick a flower, but then the queen shouted up from the burrow below, "Wait!" Everyone froze and looked towards her. She gracefully climbed out to speak to them. "Remember what happened before? When we made delicious honey, the desire for it was so great that some became greedy. In their effort to take our honey for themselves, they ended up destroying it for everyone. Now the honey and its magic has made its way into the vine and these flowers. We have an opportunity. We must avoid the mistakes that were made before." The queen continued, "To bring Honey Haven back, we must pause before we take. First, ask permission and listen to the answer. Never take the first, never take the last. Be sure to take just what you need and never more than half. Always leave some for others. If we can follow these, we may remain a haven forever. All the animals nodded as they listened in agreement. And then they started to carefully choose just a few flowers to share amongst everyone. And as they slurped and sucked up the sticky, sugary nectar, they knew exactly what they'd call this new addition to Honey Haven: honeysuckle. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that you also enjoy the summer collection with the bee and honeysuckle that means so much to me. All right, take care.